Possum skin cloaks were a really vital part of culture and practice in the southeast of Australia, and there are only 6 historical cloaks left in the world because the possum skin cloak marked who you were, your family, your connection to country, and when people died they were wrapped and buried in their possum skin cloak. And the cloak that I have on display here at the Artizon Museum has 63 pelts, and I made that specifically for Ancestral Memories, my solo exhibition at the National Gallery of Victoria. And I wanted to mark all the countries that I'm connected to. So you'll see 2 of the countries have green ochre on them, and that represents Tipperary in Ireland and Dunstable in the United Kingdom. And then the other countries are Murray Murray, Yorta Yorta, Wamba Wamba and Trawillaway in Tasmania and Bunurong. To make this particular cloak took quite a while because it was sourcing the possum pelts, which we have to acquire from New Zealand, and then it's cutting them, sewing them. 2 of my nephews made kangaroo sinew to bind the cloak, and that was really, really tough sort of sewing, but we also use a thin synthetic thread to sew them. And we've used ochre, and traditionally you would carve your design into the pelt, but because the pelts are now chemically tanned, we can't carve, so we scorch them with a burning tool to create the design. And then we ground ochre and mix that with wattle resin so that the paint stays on the pelt. And then I've used black leather dye to paint it black because the charcoal just wasn't working. With the river reed necklaces, they were given to people passing through country, through Bunurong country, as a sign of safe passage and friendship. And I've supersized the necklaces to 50 metres to talk about the loss of land, language and cultural practices. And so when you look at these objects, they look really beautiful, but just look deeper and you sort of unravel this other whole history. Now you see me seeing the invisible because nobody gets to see on that cellular level the river reed and what it represents. But also looking at those different objects, it could be, you know, a crocheted doily or your grandmother's doily, or it could be galaxies. And there's a whole range of things. They look like paintings, either watercolour or some even look like Central Desert paintings. I like to try and think of different ways to tell story through art.
My work is mostly focused on what happened in Lutruwita, which is Tasmania, also known as Van Diemen's Land, until the 1850s. So the British came to our island in the 1790s, and by 1803 they raised their flag and began official colonisation. So my people, which are Tasmanian Aboriginal people, suffered greatly from the 1790s with the kidnap of women, and then officially with land being given to British colonists who arrived. Until 1830 they were given all of the best land for arriving with those with money and sometimes their servants. So the story for me is trying to understand what happened to my ancestors, so my mother's family, so us, and what happened by extension to all of our community across Lutruwita, and particularly by British colonists, because they have not been held accountable yet for what happened. It's difficult because it was under the British flag, and how for me questions about how we challenge and request that be acknowledged, and also the compensation for land return is needed. We need our land back, which is complex but necessary. The work, for example, some Tasmanian Aboriginal children who lived with non-Aboriginal people before 1840, that was made at a particular time where I had gathered together so many lost Tasmanian Aboriginal children through research to try to understand what has happened to so many that were taken by colonists. Some were placed in an orphan asylum, but they were not orphans, just to remove them from family. And others were, I think, taken after massacre because they were found in the woods, found by a creek, you know, so this is not normal unless the parents are dead, right? A work I made about the children also was the video work, The Silenced, and this was to visit the places and show and share where they had been taken to, some of the children, including one of my ancestors was taken by a British doctor who was also responsible for taking other children, one of whom has disappeared, a boy, Aboriginal boy. So yeah, they're like mini biographies of very few of the children where I drove and walked and spent time researching, because those ones we know what happened to them. One was killed by soldiers, molested on Flinders Island, and my ancestor ran away eventually and married a convict from England. The more I make this work, the more angry I feel, but I must continue. I've made several coal necklaces, coal being such a fundamental ancient material and deep within the earth. And the necklaces I've made have come from a valley in Tasmania called the Fingal Valley, and they have a coal mine that's very small but very old for colonists. So I felt this was a way to materially show that that gravity, the weight of colonisation upon us, and be like a grieving object, and make it large, often suspend in the shape of Tasmania, the form, but it's also referencing the shell necklace tradition of Tasmanian Aboriginal women forever, making those forms from around 10 types of shells. And when I made those necklaces, I was keenly aware that tradition had not been maintained by my maternal family. Families that stayed on Bass Strait Islands after exile, or even avoiding exile, managed to keep that tradition continuing, which is a miracle and must be honoured.
My art practice reflects on the issues related to colonisation and how it's affected Aboriginal people, and also how it's an ongoing effect as well. So primarily I look at family history and the issues with mining, genocide, so it's quite broad, and so it depends on, I guess, what I'm reading. I look at archival material a lot. I travel internationally a lot for research, and so I'm not just working with blown glass as well. I work with an architectural designer, and we often work with other materials like metal, fabric. I work with printmakers, at times quite large installations. Yeah. One work, Hollowing Earth, is quite large, has 42 pieces in it, and then they are bush bananas, and so bush food appears a lot in my work that represent Aboriginal people, Aboriginal bodies, our culture. That work, Hollowing Earth, is about the issues with mining on my country, which is Gulgutha, and there's a mine about 40 minutes north from my birthplace of Woomera, and it's a uranium and copper mine. I grew up with the story of, uranium obviously is a material that's used for nuclear energy, or to produce nuclear energy and I guess nuclear weapons. And so I wanted to create a work that I guess talks about desecration of country, and that when you mine country, the hole is there. They don't often fill it in, and so there's damage to that area, and it's a long-term effect. And so uranium also causes a lot of sickness. So it's those bush bananas and Hollowing Earth show that scratching and digging and I guess the sickness within country as well. The 3 blue Danubes, the glass bombs at Artizon, is one of the earlier works that I created, talking about the issues with nuclear testing in South Australia that was undertaken by the British and Australian government in the 1950s. So the shapes of those 3 bombs are what were called the blue Danubes that were tested there, and inside each of those bombs are deceased Aboriginal people. Multiple pieces of not just about how many people have died, because I think we don't always know, because I think particularly in archives, the numbers are never really true. It's through talking through with community that I discover that there were more people that passed away. But I think I create large numbers as well because I don't want them to be alone. And so I never show one yam or one bush banana or one bush plum by themselves. Yeah.
I'm a one-year artist from northwest Queensland, and my art practice is centred on country, culture, family, history. I like to make work which references country first, whether it's in Australia or in other countries. I look at Indigenous histories, the earliest histories within those places, and make my work according to what I see, what I feel, what I touch, and what I know. I've made a number of works which incorporate profiles of particularly the maternal women in my mother's family, and I've also used some of my cousin, for example, for my dad's side of the family. But with my daughter, I see her as, the next link in the chain that connects us all through our maternal line. And so I liked the idea of her being the younger generation and looking across country and connecting with that history and memory, and also seeing the maps of the stations, which many of my family have worked on, both in Queensland and the Northern Territory border, because if, the border cuts across our language groups, it scarifies our country, and it doesn't contain familiar names for our language groups. It contains introduced names from often European places. So she's looking across, and in between there's one of the works, it's almost like an open book. It's got the crease from the indigo. It's almost like a sort of a water, connecting with the water of the Gulf of Carpentaria and memory. And I talk about blue being the colour of memory. It's something which is transportive, but it also pulls you into a deep, dreamlike subconscious state. So I see her looking across, and it's like younger generation ancestors connecting and healing. I knew that I was going to be representing Australia along with Emily Ngwari and Yvonne Komatri at the Venice Biennale. And at that time I was making work, but there were these environmental hazards occurring in Australia, what was called red tides, where there's too much nitrogen, not enough oxygen. And I was thinking about Venice, and I'd been there before, and I knew about the environmental concerns they have too, because of the dredging within the laguna, because of the cruise boats coming in. So the lagoon and all the aquaculture in that area was compromised. And I was thinking about the canals being almost like capillaries or veins, or, you know, sort of waterways within the bodies of both places. So I was referencing both what was happening in Sydney with the red tides, where there was this red brown algae bloom, and then what was going to happen, you know, sort of transporting that across to Venice as well. One of the letters that I saw had this term called a preponderance of Aboriginal blood. I'd never heard of that, but it means if you have Aboriginality through both sides of your family, you are not entitled to vote. And then I started looking through at the categorisations of Aboriginal people and who had the right to vote and who didn't. And I thought, I need to do something with this. It's something which I have seen, and then I need to pass it on to future generations of both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people to understand what happened to our people in Australia, how we were categorised, pigeonholed, and documented and restricted. So that's what the documents are. They are related to who can participate in the voting, and it's horrific. And also the documents that kept people, you know, almost chained up by bureaucracy. I really was working with the aesthetics of the look of the writing or the documents themselves. I made lithographic touche washes on the copper plates and etched those, so that was the blood that was printed. I think I bring that printmaking knowledge into a lot of my work too, whether it's works on canvas or even public artworks or things like that, because you learn to work with things very closely and then to blow them up, and very much the layering. So layering is a large part of my practice, whether it's video, it's often layering archive documents along with imagery and sound, and so that you get a textured feeling within the work. The main thing that I want to do is to make people feel and make them think.